Years ago, Obian believed only sons could carry a man's legacy. When his wife Wangba gave birth to 7 daughters, he called them a curse and pushed them into a broken hut behind his compound. He later celebrated the birth of 2 sons, believing his future was finally secure. But time proved him wrong. The daughters he rejected became disciplined, respected women who saved their father from loneliness and shame. And when Obian finally fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness, the daughters he once banished chose mercy. Now the family lives together again, rebuilding their life and business. But somewhere in the shadows, Obian's 2 sons are watching. Their hearts are burning with jealousy, and this time, they are about to make a move so dangerous that no one in the village could ever imagine it.
The first light of morning spread slowly across the village, turning the sky into soft shades of gold and orange. Roosters crowed in the distance, and the smell of fresh earth and palm oil drifted gently through the warm air. For the first time in many years, Obian woke up not with pride or anger, but with quiet humility. He sat outside the family compound on a simple wooden stool, watching his daughters move about the courtyard with confidence and purpose. Just a few years ago, he had called them a curse. The memory still burned inside him like a scar that would never fully heal. Yet now, those same daughters were the strength holding his entire life together. Wangba stood near the cooking fire, calmly preparing the morning meal, while 2 of the daughters arranged baskets of vegetables and palm oil jars for the day's business. Another daughter counted coins carefully, making sure every transaction from the previous day had been recorded properly. Their small trading business had grown faster than anyone in the village expected. Villagers came daily to buy their goods because they trusted them. They trusted their honesty, their discipline, and their kindness. Obian watched silently, feeling something he had never allowed himself to feel before, deep, overwhelming pride in the daughters he once rejected. When the eldest daughter walked past him, carrying a basket of goods to the roadside store, she paused and gave him a respectful smile. "Father," she said gently, "the traders from the next village are coming today. We may need your help loading the palm oil barrels." Obian nodded slowly. A few years ago, such work would have been beneath him. Now he stood up immediately, grateful simply to be useful. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the compound slowly filled with the sounds of business and life. Villagers arrived with donkeys and wooden carts, calling out greetings as they entered the yard. The daughters moved confidently through the crowd, negotiating prices, weighing produce, and recording sales. Their voices carried calm authority, something that surprised many people who remembered how they once lived in the broken hut behind the compound. Wangba stood nearby, watching quietly, her eyes full of quiet pride. She had seen these girls grow through pain, humiliation, and struggle, and she knew every bit of their strength had been earned the hard way. Obian walked beside them, lifting heavy containers and stacking goods on carts. Sweat ran down his forehead, but he did not complain. In fact, there was something peaceful about the walk. Every time a villager thanked the daughters for their honesty, Obian felt both pride and guilt tightening in his chest. One elderly man even laughed warmly as he handed over payment and said, "Obian, your daughters have more wisdom than many sons in this village." Years ago, such words would have filled him with rage. Today, they filled him with shame and gratitude. He simply nodded and replied softly, "Yes, they do." Not far away, near the doorway of the main house, the eldest daughter gently rocked her newborn child in her arms. The small baby boy slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated history that surrounded his family. When Obian finished stacking the last crate, he walked slowly toward them. The daughter carefully placed the baby in his arms, and for a moment the entire world seemed to grow quiet. Obian looked down at his grandson, his hands trembling slightly. "This child will grow in a home filled with respect," he whispered softly, "not the mistakes I made." By late afternoon, the market activity began to slow, and the compound returned to a calm rhythm. The daughters counted the day's earnings while Wangba prepared food for everyone under the shade of a large teased one another about small mistakes made during the busy day. Even Obian found himself smiling quietly as he listened. The sound of happiness inside this courtyard once would have seemed impossible. For so many years, this place had been filled with bitterness and silence. Now it felt alive again. As the family gathered for their evening meal, the sky slowly turned red with the setting sun. Obian cleared his throat and looked around the table at each of his daughters. The words did not come easily, but he forced himself to say them anyway. "I know I cannot erase what I did, but every day you allow me to stand here beside you is a gift I do not deserve." For a moment, the courtyard became completely silent. Then Wangba placed a calm hand on his shoulder. "The past cannot be changed," she said quietly, "but the future is built by what we choose to do today." The daughters nodded in agreement, and the conversation slowly turned to plans for expanding the business to neighboring villages. Hope filled the air like a gentle breeze. Yet far beyond the peaceful compound, another story was unfolding in the darker corners of the village. Near an old palm grove at the edge of the road, two young men stood watching the distant lights of Obian's home. They were his sons, the same sons he had once celebrated as the future of his legacy. But their faces carried none of the warmth or peace now filling the family courtyard. Instead, their eyes burned with bitterness. For months, they had watched their father rebuild his life, watched the village praise the daughters they had always mocked, watched the business grow stronger day by day. Every word of admiration spoken about the daughters felt like an insult to them. One of the brothers kicked a stone across the dusty ground and spat angrily. "Everything there should have been ours," he muttered. The other brother stared silently at the glowing compound in the distance, his jaw clenched tight. In the quiet darkness between the palm trees, jealousy slowly twisted into something far more dangerous. Finally, he spoke in a low, cold voice. "If father wants those daughters to be his family, then we will make sure that family has nothing left to it." The first brother turned toward him, curiosity flashing in his eyes. "What do you mean?" The second brother's expression hardened as a cruel idea formed in his mind. "Just wait," he replied quietly. "Soon, the whole village will see what happens when people forget who the real heirs are." And in that moment, while the compound behind them remained full of laughter and hope, the first shadow of a coming disaster began to grow. The second brother's expression hardened as the cruel idea settled deeper in his mind. The night air moved slowly through the palm trees, and the distant sound of laughter from Obian's compound drifted faintly across the quiet fields. It only made their anger worse. For a long moment, neither of the brothers spoke. They simply stared toward the glowing lights of the home that once belonged to them. Finally, the younger one broke the silence. "Do you hear that?" he muttered bitterly. "They laugh like kings, like they have forgotten everything." His brother's jaw tightened. "They have forgotten us," he replied coldly. "Father threw us aside the moment those daughters began making him proud." The words hung in the air like smoke. Both of them knew it wasn't entirely true, but jealousy had a way of twisting every memory into something darker. In their minds, the daughters had stolen what was meant to be theirs. Every sack of grain sold in the market, every coin counted in the courtyard, every villager praising the daughters' discipline, it all felt like an insult carved into their pride. The older brother picked up a small stick and drew angry lines in the dust with it. "He used to say we were the future," he growled. "He said the family name would stand because of us." The younger one looked back at the compound lights again, his eyes narrowing. "And now the entire village bows to those girls." A long silence followed. Then slowly, the older brother leaned closer and whispered something that made the other's eyes widen. It was not just anger anymore. It was the beginning of a plan.
Over the next few days, the two brothers moved quietly through the village like shadows. They avoided the main road, avoided the busy market, and most importantly, avoided their father's compound. Instead, they spent long hours talking in abandoned huts or walking along the dry riverbank where no one would hear them. Their conversations grew darker each time they met. At first, they only spoke of humiliating the daughters, spreading rumors, or ruining their reputation in the market, but those ideas quickly felt too small, too weak. The business was already strong, people trusted the daughters too much. One afternoon, while sitting beneath a tall baobab tree, the younger brother slammed his fist against the ground in frustration. "Nothing will change as long as that business stands," he said sharply. "As long as father keeps earning money with them, the village will keep praising them." The older brother stared thoughtfully toward the dusty road. Slowly, his lips curled into a thin smile. "Then the business must fall," he said quietly. The younger brother looked at him, confused. "Fall? How?" For a moment, the older brother said nothing. Then he leaned closer and spoke in a low voice that carried a dangerous calm. "If the warehouse burns," he said slowly, "everything they built disappears overnight." The younger brother froze. The idea was shocking, but also strangely satisfying. He imagined the daughters standing helplessly as their goods turned to ash. He imagined his father forced to watch his new life collapse. The thought filled him with a cruel sense of power. "No warehouse," he murmured slowly. "No business." The older brother nodded. "And when father loses everything," he added, "he will remember who his real sons are." While darkness slowly grew in the brothers' hearts, life in Obian's compound continued peacefully. The daughters woke early each morning preparing goods for the market and organizing deliveries to nearby villages. Their small trading operation had begun expanding faster than anyone expected. Traders from other communities now visited regularly, bringing cloth, grains, and palm oil to exchange for the daughters' carefully managed supplies. The eldest daughter had become the quiet leader of the entire operation. Her decisions were calm, thoughtful, and always fair. Villagers admired her confidence, and many younger women had begun visiting the compound just to learn from her. Wangba watched these moments with quiet pride. She had raised her daughters to survive hardship, but she never imagined they would one day inspire others. Even Obian often stood silently at the edge of the courtyard, amazed at how naturally the daughters handled everything. Sometimes he still struggled to believe that the same girls he once pushed into a broken hut had become the backbone of the entire family. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, he sat beside Wangba, under the mango tree. "I spent half my life chasing the wrong idea of strength," he admitted softly. Wangba looked toward their daughters laughing near the storage building. "Strength was always here," she replied calmly. "You just needed time to see it." Obian nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he truly felt at peace. But not everyone in the village shared that peace. One evening, while the village prepared for the upcoming harvest festival, the two brothers gathered again near the abandoned hut. Lantern lights flickered in the distance, and the sound of festival drums echoed faintly across the fields. The entire community would soon be celebrating, dancing, and drinking late into the night. It was the perfect distraction. The younger brother paced nervously across the dead floor. "Are you sure this will work?" The older brother leaned against the wall, completely calm. "Everyone will be at the festival. No one will watch the warehouse." He opened a small sack and revealed several bottles of palm oil and dry cloth. The younger brother stared at them, understanding immediately. His heart began beating faster, not with fear, but with excitement. "One spark," he said quietly, "and the entire building will burn before anyone notices." The younger brother slowly nodded. In his mind, he could already see the flames rising into the night sky. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the older brother looked toward the distant lights of their father's compound. His voice dropped into a cold whisper. "Tonight, the daughters will learn something. Mercy does not make you strong." And as the festival drums grew louder across the village, the brothers stepped into the darkness to prepare for the most dangerous move they had ever made.
And as the festival drums grew louder across the village, the brothers stepped deeper into the darkness to prepare for the most dangerous move they had ever made. The night felt strangely alive, filled with music, laughter, and the bright glow of lanterns hanging across the main square. Villagers danced around large fires, children ran between the stalls of roasted corn and palm cakes, and the elders sat together sharing stories that echoed through the warm evening air. It was the one night of the year when the entire community forgot their worries and celebrated together. But far from the joyful crowd, two shadows moved quietly along the narrow dirt paths leading toward Obian's compound. The brothers kept their heads low as they carried a small sack filled with oil-soaked cloth and flint stones. The sound of drums masked the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. When they finally reached the edge of the compound, they paused behind a cluster of tall palm trees. From there they could see the storage warehouse clearly, the wooden building where the daughters kept sacks of grain, jars of palm oil, and bundles of cloth for trading. Lantern light flickered gently from inside the main house, where Wangba and the daughters were finishing their evening meal before joining the festival later. The older brother's eyes hardened as he studied the warehouse door. "This is the moment," he whispered quietly. The younger brother swallowed, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. He had imagined this moment many times during the past week, but now that they were standing here, the reality felt heavier than the plan itself. Still, jealousy had already pushed them too far to turn back. Inside the house, the daughters were laughing softly as they prepared baskets of food to take to the festival. The eldest daughter adjusted the cloth wrapped around her baby boy and smiled as her sisters teased her about being overly protective. Wangba moved calmly between them, making sure everyone had eaten before they left. Obian sat near the doorway watching his family with quiet gratitude. Moments like this still felt fragile to him, like something that could disappear if he blinked too quickly. "Father," one of the younger daughters called with a playful grin, "if you sit there staring at us all night, you will miss the festival dancing." Obian chuckled softly and shook his head. "These old bones are not made for dancing anymore," he replied. But the truth was, he simply enjoyed watching them, watching the life he almost destroyed slowly bloom again. Outside, however, the brothers were already creeping toward the warehouse door. The older one slowly pushed it open, careful not to make a sound. Inside, the room was filled with the scent of stored grain and palm oil. Moonlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, revealing stacks of goods that represented months of hard work by the daughters. The younger brother stared at the shelves for a moment, feeling a strange flicker of hesitation. "Maybe this is enough," he whispered nervously. "We could just scare them, break a few things." The older brother turned sharply toward him, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "No," he said quietly. "If we leave anything standing, they will rebuild." He knelt down and began soaking pieces of cloth with oil, placing them carefully between the crates and sacks. Tonight, it all ends. Just as the brothers prepared to strike the flintstone, something unexpected happened. A small voice echoed faintly from outside the warehouse. "Who is there?" The brothers froze instantly. Through the half-open door, they saw a small figure standing near the path. It was Obian's eldest daughter. She had stepped outside earlier to calm her restless baby, walking slowly beneath the moonlight when she noticed movement near the warehouse. At first, she thought it might be a wandering goat or a stray villager heading toward the festival. But when she saw two figures moving inside the building, her instincts immediately sharpened. She stepped closer, holding the child firmly against her shoulder. "Who is inside?" she called again, her voice steady but cautious. The brothers exchanged quick glances. For a moment, panic flickered across the younger one's face, but the older brother's expression darkened with determination. Slowly, he stepped forward into the doorway so she could see him clearly. The daughter's eyes widened in shock. "You," she whispered. The younger brother stepped beside him, his face tense. The baby in her arms stirred softly as the wind carried the distant sound of festival drums between them. "You should not be here," she said quietly, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is our family home." The older brother gave a bitter laugh.
Family, he repeated coldly. You call this family after stealing everything from us? The daughter's face tightened with hurt, but also strength. Nothing was stolen, she replied firmly. Father chose to change. We chose to forgive him. The younger brother's hands trembled slightly as he held the flintstone. The moment had turned far more complicated than he expected. Before the argument could continue, another voice suddenly cut through the night. What is happening here? Wangba stood at the edge of the courtyard with two of the daughters beside her. They had heard the raised voices and followed the eldest daughter outside. Behind them, Obian was already stepping forward with a worried expression. Lantern lights spilled across the ground as the family gathered near the warehouse. For a long moment, everyone simply stared at the two brothers standing inside with oil-soaked cloth scattered around the crates. The truth of their plan became obvious instantly. Obian's face went pale as he understood what they had come to do. My sons, he said slowly, his voice heavy with disbelief. What have you done? The older brother's eyes burned with anger as he looked at the family standing together before him. What you forced us to do. But something unexpected happened then. Instead of stepping back in fear, the daughters slowly moved forward together, forming a protective line between the brothers and the warehouse. Their expressions were calm, but their eyes carried fierce determination. The eldest daughter shifted the baby gently onto Wangba's arms and stepped ahead of her sisters. If you want to destroy this place, she said quietly, you will have to face us first. The festival drums continued echoing across the village as the night grew suddenly tense. And for the first time since they began their plan, the brothers realized they were not facing helpless victims, they were facing the courage of the very sisters they had always underestimated.
And for the first time since they began their plan, the brothers realized they were not facing helpless victims. They were facing the courage of the very sisters they had always underestimated. The night air felt suddenly heavier, as if the entire village had fallen silent to witness the moment. The daughters stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the warehouse, their expressions calm but unshaken. Lantern light from the courtyard flickered across their faces, revealing neither fear nor hesitation. The eldest daughter stood slightly ahead of the others, her posture firm and protective. Behind her, Wangba held the baby close to her chest, watching the scene unfold with quiet strength in her eyes. Obian, however, looked completely broken. His hands trembled as he stepped slowly forward, staring at the two sons he once celebrated with so much pride. The oil-soaked cloth scattered across the warehouse floor made the situation painfully clear. You came here to burn your own family's work? He asked softly, his voice carrying a deep sorrow that seemed heavier than anger. The younger brother shifted nervously, unable to meet his father's eyes. But the older brother remained stiff with resentment. What family? He replied sharply. You chose them over us the moment they started making you money. The words echoed painfully across the courtyard. For a moment, no one moved. The daughters simply stood their ground, their silence speaking louder than any argument. Finally, the eldest daughter stepped forward another step. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion. We never took anything from you, she said calmly. The only thing we did was refuse to become bitter like you. The older brother's face twisted with anger, but something in her calm confidence made him hesitate. The tension in the air slowly began to shift. The younger brother looked around at the scene before him, the lantern light glowing across the courtyard, the warehouse filled with the goods that had rebuilt the family's life, and the sisters standing bravely in front of it without weapons, without threats, without fear. He remembered something suddenly, a memory he had buried years ago. He remembered the days when all of them were children, running through the same courtyard together before jealousy and pride tore the family apart. The memory struck him like a sudden wave of shame. His hand loosened around the flintstone and it slipped quietly onto the ground. The small sound seemed to echo loudly in the silence. The older brother looked at him sharply. What are you doing? He snapped. But the younger one shook his head slowly, his voice trembling. "This isn't right," he muttered. "They didn't destroy our lives, we did." The older brother's anger flared instantly. "Don't be weak now," he hissed. But the daughters remained completely still, watching carefully. The eldest daughter spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Look at us," she said gently. "We could have hated father forever for what he did to us, but we chose forgiveness because hate only destroys more lives." Her words hung quietly in the night air. Obian felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched his daughters speak with such strength and wisdom. These were the same girls he once called a curse, and now they were the only reason this family still had a future. Slowly, the older brother's anger began to crack under the weight of the moment. The plan that had seemed so powerful just hours earlier suddenly looked small and foolish, standing before the courage of his sisters. He looked around again at the warehouse, the courtyard, and the family standing together without fear. Even Obian's eyes held no hatred, only deep sadness. That was what finally broke something inside him. His hands loosened slightly, and for the first time since arriving, he looked uncertain. The daughters did not move closer, but their calm presence made the silence feel impossible to ignore. Finally, the eldest brother kicked the oil-soaked cloth aside with frustration and stepped away from the crates. "This place was supposed to belong to us," he muttered bitterly. The eldest daughter nodded slowly. "It still can," she replied quietly. Everyone looked at her in surprise. Even the younger brother raised his head slightly. "This home was never meant to divide us," she continued. "If you truly want to rebuild your place here, then start by helping us protect what we built." The offer hung in the air like a fragile bridge between two broken sides of the family. The older brother stared at her, stunned by the unexpected mercy. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he bent down and began gathering the scattered cloth from the warehouse floor. The younger brother followed silently. Obian closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed with emotion. The fire that almost destroyed everything had been stopped, not by force, but by courage and forgiveness. Yet, deep inside everyone present, there was still a quiet understanding that rebuilding trust would take far longer than stopping a single terrible mistake.